Hi, I'm Sue Peters. I'm a member of the American Monetary Institute, and we're presenting Reverend Delman Coates. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He graduated from Morehouse College in Atlanta, and he went to the Harvard Divinity School, and then he went and got his PhD at Columbia University.
You'll be fine.
And he's going to be talking to you about the new abolition. The old institution of black slavery has been replaced by what we have today called debt slavery. Whose foundation is our privately created bank money system. Okay? Enjoy. And following on Delman's talk, Jamie Walton of the AMI will be also talk a little bit more about some of the details. Okay? And then we'll have questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Sue, and good morning to all of you. It's so good to see all of you today. Good to see old friends. And I look forward to further partnership and collaboration with new friends. I want to thank the American Monetary Institute. I have really been incredibly privileged to connect with AMI. I look forward to ongoing collaboration with AMI. Certainly I want to encourage those of you here today who desire to attend our conference in Chicago. What are the dates? September 14th and 15th.
7th to the 7th. 14th through the 7th.
14th through the 17th. Please come to share with us. I am going to share a few words on today's topic, and then I'm going to yield to Jamie Walton and Joe Bongiovanni for some remarks, and then we can sort of open up the floor for dialogue and conversation. I am calling my talk The New Abolitionism. It is a term that I have attempted to frame and coin to refer to our need to free and to liberate the public from debt or interest slavery. I'm calling this The New Abolitionism, Monetary Reform, and the Future of Human Rights. Now, I use this title, many of you may wonder why I'm using this title. And many of you know that the struggle for the private issuance of money and the bondage it imposes on the public, it's not a new idea. It's not a new struggle. This is not a new issue. But I use it marking for branding purposes in my yet-to-be-realized attempt to popularize the issue of monetary reform among civil rights leaders and faith leaders, primarily in the African-American context and community out of which I come. And so the key strategy for opposing money reform, I think the key strategy for opposing money reform by the financial elite is to change the subject. Many of you will recall that after the global financial crisis and the Occupy movement had gripped the nation and even the world, I believe in large part the eyes of the public were focused in the right direction. Now we have begun to focus as a nation on race relations and police shootings. These are legitimate issues. I do not want to minimize, disregard them at all. But it is interesting to me that our focus nationally has gotten away from and off of Wall Street and the banks in the way we were 2008, 2009, 2010. We're seeing repeals of Dodd-Frank, and certainly those are not sufficient solutions in and of themselves. But we've gotten our eyes off the ball. I grew up playing baseball, and I would like to think I was a good hitter. But whenever I was in a hitting slump, my father would also say, Delman, you got to keep your eye on the ball. And I think that if we're going to see the kind of progress we need to see today, we need to invite the public to keep our eyes on the ball. And I use the new abolitionism as a trope, troping off of Michelle Alexander's very powerful usage of the term, the new Jim Crow, to talk about mass incarceration as a continuation of a prior legacy of systemic oppression in this country. And so since abolition of chattel slavery in the United States has a long established legacy in this country, one that served as a unifying meta-narrative, and I want to talk about this a bit later, the way in which abolitionism served and provided a unifying meta-narrative to bring together people across various racial, religious, and class backgrounds and contexts. In the same way abolitionism provided that kind of unifying meta-narrative for those concerned about justice, fairness, and morality and our democracy, I've been thinking about the new abolitionism for conceptual currency to connect those in the communities that I serve with allies across various racial, religious, and political boundaries to focus on this issue, money reform, as a unifying narrative to link the fragmented fellowships on the left and really the fragmented 99.9% in America. Because really, regardless of your political label, we are all victims of this money system. It is the one thing, regardless of your race, religion, class, gender, sexual orientation, that links all of us. And that's money. And so it seems to me that we need to think about an issue that links us rather than frames that may distinguish us. If we seek to develop a movement that brings folks in Appalachia with those on the south side of Chicago, we're going to have to think about a narrative in my mind that invites us to a similar conversation. Tolstoy said that money is a new form of slavery and distinguishable from the old simply by the fact that it is impersonal, that there is no human relationship between master and slave, unquote. And I want to come back to that at the end of our talk today I want to talk about this need, as I just alluded to, a unifying meta-narrative as a means towards creating the kind of broader popular discourse that we so desperately need for those who identify as progressives and are concerned about the common good. And so I want to begin my talk by talking about my own journey to becoming a money reformer, because perhaps there are some connections with my own journey. I'm not an economist. I am not a historian. I am not a political scientist. I am a Black Baptist preacher. I serve a congregation of 9, almost 10,000 African American members in Clinton, Maryland, just outside of the nation's capital. I am deeply steeped and rooted in the Black church's tradition of social justice. And my ideals, the ideals of the Black church, are articulated in perhaps our most notable representative of the freedom fighting tradition of African American Christianity, and that's none other than Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King has this quote. He says, "Any religion that professes to be concerned about the souls of men and women, but is not concerned about the slums that damn them, the economic conditions that strangle them, and the social conditions that cripple them, is a spiritually dead religion awaiting burial." And so the pursuit of the beloved community for all people through the promotion of equality, fairness, and the proportionate distribution of material resources by confronting unjust systems, governments, practices, and policies, and power relationships is at the heart of both our civic and ethical witness. And for those who identify as religious, our spiritual witness as well. And so I want to suggest that the success of America's pluralistic democracy can be significantly advanced through the reintegration of religious progressives in American public life. It has become too common to sort of dismiss people of faith from these kinds of conversations. And I get it, because those who identify as religious have advanced everything that's antithetical to what is consistent with our American civic values and our spiritual values as well. But I want to contend that as an African American clergy leader and churches across the country who represent the Black church tradition, that a historical and theoretical construct rooted in the legacy of social justice activism, Christian love, and equality have been and continue to be vital forces of civic engagement, inclusion, economic justice, and social transformation. I have seen it. 5 years ago, it's largely because of my own outspokenness for marriage equality in the state of Maryland. We were successful in Maryland at defeating attempts to deny the LGBT community of equal rights under the law, which really is a statement to me of the power and the potential of people of faith in the progressive movement. I must note that because I am coming out of this tradition where the prevailing notions of black clergy, black preaching, and black churches tends to be decidedly conservative, decidedly regressive. And I want to, really model something different for America and different for our society. And so this is decidedly, and so this commitment to social transformation is connected with the historic faith traditions of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and the other major faith traditions of our world that have had a historic critique and position against usury. Usury is not just excessive interest. If you have not read Stephen Zarlinga's The Lost Science of Money, I really encourage you to read this. The definition of usury as excessive interest was a strategy or a ploy used by those who sympathize with bankers to convince the church to give up its historic position on usury. That by defining usury as excessive interest, it provided the pathway for getting theologues and philosophers at the time to become open to some interest. And this began to open the door to the historic position of these major faith traditions of the world against usury. Usury, macro usury, is the immoral, unjust manipulation of money. It is the idea that money should not make money in and of itself. My commitment to monetary reform as a clergy leader is committed to social justice, and it is my view that monetary reform must become the #1 human and civil rights issue of our day. That's my commitment. I hope to explain that. And so that became clear to me, I would say, around 2009. My work since 2009 to address the foreclosure crisis, which devastated Prince George's County, Maryland, where I pastored. If you know anything about Prince George's County, Maryland, it is touted in some quarters as having the highest, the wealthiest population of African Americans in the country. So it goes back and forth between Prince George's County, Maryland, and Fulton County or DeKalb County in Atlanta. Well, our community was devastated by the global financial crisis. And it was over the context of helping people try to stay in their homes, remain in their homes, that I really discovered the complete immoral practice of mortgage and foreclosure fraud that was at the foundation of the global financial crisis. I believe I sort of became this de facto expert on securitizations, collateralized debt obligations, all of this other kind of stuff, and trying to keep people in their homes. And I wanted to understand, why is it that the same criminals that got us in this mess became richer while the rest of the country became poorer? That their practices have resulted in the largest transfer of wealth in human history. I believe one speaker said it yesterday, and I want to ask him, when your home goes underwater, when your home is foreclosed on, that value is not lost. It is transferred. That wealth is not lost or transferred. And we saw the largest confiscation of black wealth in history. Not just black wealth, but wealth in general. But certainly in the community that I pastor, we've seen the largest confiscation of wealth in history. And think about the insanity of what was happening and continues to happen. Banks securitized notes, then they insured the notes, And then when the homeowners failed, defaulted, and the banks wanted them to default, they made the taxpayer bail them out. And so they privatized profits, and then they socialized the risk. And at that point, I thought that the solution to our economic justice problems, at that time, I thought were just about financial regulatory provisions that needed to be in place. That all we needed to do was to have an economically just and fair society was to rein in the banks. We hear this oftentimes. And while these reforms are necessary and are appealing, in and of themselves, financial regulations are not enough because they are built on the premise that the global financial crisis happened because of an absence of cops on Wall Street. But what if the crisis happened not because of a lack of policing on the street, but because there was something wrong with the street itself? That there was something wrong with the foundation of the street itself, and not just that there were insufficient cops on Wall Street, came into view for me when I discovered that when homeowners are given mortgages, the bank never actually loaned them any money. Now, if you ask 10 people, when you get a mortgage, where did the bank get the money for that mortgage? 11 of them will say, from the vault, from deposits, that they aggregate savings and they loan me what was deposited. 12 out of 10 will say that's where it comes from. And not only will the average citizen say this, but politicians will say the same.
Yep.
Many thought leaders will say the same. But when one realizes that people go into 30 years of debt or interest servitude to an institution and an industry that never loaned them any money, there was no consideration. And due to tricky accounting, what happens is that the bank was able to sell notes because the notes are assets and not liabilities. I don't want to get into this. I'm still trying to make my way to money reform. But that's when the light came on for me because I was reminded of a quote from Dr. King, who was himself quoting Victor Hugo in the aftermath of riots in the 60s. Here's what King said. If a soul lives in darkness, sins will be committed. But the guilty one is not the one who commits the sins, but the one who causes the darkness. Unquote. What King is laying out for us is a paradigm on how we might fight injustice in the world today. And the only way to do that, he contends, is to understand the archaeology or the origins of injustice, or the root cause of the problem. King, if you read him, he talks a lot about derivative injustices, or second-order injustices, or causative injustices. And as long as we are addressing the symptoms and leave the root cause in place, we are merely spinning our wheels and we're never addressing the problem. Can I give you a conceptual metaphor? Yes. I say, can I give you a conceptual metaphor?
Yes.
Yes. If this room were flooded with water, and I gave you, and the water is pouring onto the floor from the sink, and I gave you a mop and a bucket, and I said, clean up the water. If you took the mop and the bucket and just started mopping the floor, but never turned off the faucet, you're never addressing the problem. If you really want to solve the problem, you have to first turn off the faucet and then proceed with cleaning up the mess. And so King, I use that conceptual metaphor to try to think about what King is talking about when he's talking about derivative injustices versus causative injustices. And the struggle for human rights today must advance beyond mopping up the floor.
Yes.
We tend to fight, I want to respectfully suggest, we tend to fight the symptoms and not the source. Well-intentioned, I might add. But King's last speech, in which people tend to remember the I've been to the mountaintop portion of the speech on April 3rd, 1968. We remember that I've been to the mountaintop portion of the speech. But few people remember his critique of banks in the middle portion of the speech. King told the audience there in Memphis, remember, he's there fighting for the rights of sanitation workers. And King says, quote, also in the human rights revolution, if something isn't done and done in a hurry to bring the colored peoples of the world out of their long years of poverty, their long years of hurt and neglect, the whole world is doomed. It's all right to talk about streets flowing with milk and honey. But God has commanded us to be concerned about the slums down here and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. Now the whole thing we all have to do is this, he says. Always anchor our eternal direct action with the power of economic withdrawal. And I call on you to take your money out of the banks downtown, deposit your money in Tri-State Bank, he says. We want a bank-in movement in Memphis. We begin the process of building a greater economic base, unquote. Economic justice is the unfinished work of the civil and human rights work of Dr. King. And while we do not know the full extent of his evolving thoughts on economic justice because his life was taken from him too soon, nonetheless, his concern about the economic realities in this country reflect an effort on King's part to focus not just on the symptomatic issues we so often focus on, but on what King would call causative injustices. King said, what good is it to have the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy the burger? King understood that money and economics were the cause of the darkness that we face in the world today. With all of the necessary issues that perhaps can be and should be a part of our evolving comprehensive platform, issues like campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics, ending Citizens United, protecting voter rights, environmental protection, banking and financial regulatory reform. I believe that King's evolving thinking around economics and money would have caused him to oppose our current monetary system in which money is issued by private banks as an interest-bearing debt to the public. We need a public money system where the benefit of money issuance goes to the people who work hard in this country, and where the benefit of money creation and money issuance goes towards public infrastructure, roads, schools, jobs, the environment, rather than to the benefit of the money issuers who account for maybe 1% of the population. Think about this. The average American probably works 40 to 60 hours a week paying interest on debt-based money, paying interest on a mortgage, most of which is front-loaded with interest, on a car note, what else? On a school loan, probably Macy's credit card.
We buy.
Everything we buy
has interest.
Everything we buy, the cost of it is probably bid up by what, 40% because of our debt-based money system. The labor, productivity, and the prosperity of the public goes to people who earn, and institutions who earn an unearned economic benefit for merely issuing the nation's money. We can do better than this, I believe. We must do better than this. Our future requires it. Can I give you another conceptual metaphor?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the conceptual metaphors to help me grasp the implications of a debt-based money system is musical chairs. Musical chairs, there are not enough chairs for the number of people in the game. And if you play musical chairs, it's a fun game. It's a fun game until you don't have a chair. And when the music stops, what happens? People push, People shove. People can get very violent. Playing a game. Why? Because there are not enough chairs for the number of people in the game. Debt-based money systems are a lot like musical chairs. Okay? Now I realize I may not be articulating this in a way that's acceptable to subject matter experts, but the principle still lies. Debt-based money system creates an environment in which the principal amount of money is in circulation, but the interest portion of money is not. If I could create a hypothetical community, now I've written about this in the Huffington Post recently, an article I wrote on Palm Sunday entitled Jesus and the Money System in April of this year. I advanced this hypothetical community. Imagine there are 10 people in a community, and each of those 10 people are issued $1,000 that they have to pay back to me at some arbitrary interest rate, let's just say 10%. I'm just sharing this to help you get a framework, a conceptual framework. Well, the problem is that they have to pay back this interest, this money that I've made available to them, put in circulation at some interest rate, let's say 10%, and they can keep the rest. They can work, they can do whatever they desire to do to earn money. Well, the problem it creates for them economically is a mathematical one. There's $10,000 in circulation, but how much do they owe?
11.
Oh, 11,000. Now that extra interest portion of money is not in circulation. Okay? This debt-based money system that they're in puts them in an inherently competitive and violent economic contest of competing for insufficient economic resources. Are you with me?
Yes.
A lot like musical chairs.
Yes.
Now, some may say, perhaps rightly so, that depending on the flow of money, this situation could be resolved if a person was willing to defer eating food every day, having lights at night, and having a jacket in the wintertime. Maybe this dynamic could be solved if some of the people were willing to defer basic necessities. Then maybe this debt-based money system could work. But I think most of us would like, some berries in the morning, a nice kale and quinoa salad for lunch, and then something with a glass of wine for dinner. Generally, this is what most people want. Most people don't want to be in the wintertime without having a sweater or a jacket, right? So basically, debt-based money creates an economy with its insufficient economic resources. I really want people to grasp this. So in that environment of money scarcity, what are those people who don't have a chair? What are they going to do? What are they going to be left to do in order to exist and subsist? Well, they're going to be forced to a range of things that many of us would not prefer. In the 21st century, we are confronted with a myriad of social and economic problems. And the American way of life and the ability for people to thrive is being compromised by unemployment, underfunded public schools, crumbling community infrastructure like roads and bridges, cuts to social programs, unaffordable housing market. We see gentrification happening in every major city in America. Lack of investments to protect the environment, state budgets dwindling, and the mass incarceration of people for crimes associated with poverty. And while taxes and the cost of living continue to rise, we are constantly told by elected officials that there's insufficient money available to fund the needs of our society. That is simply not true. The lion's share of the economic pie is going to pay interest at federal level, state level, local level, and individual levels on the issuance of debt-based money. Trillions of dollars are going annually to merely pay interest on debt-based money. And while the country continues to be shackled by debt, stagnation, and budgetary shortfalls, the financial industry that caused the global financial crisis has emerged from the recent global crisis bigger and wealthier and more arrogant than it was before. That the industry that caused the greatest financial collapse since the Great Depression is now larger than it was before the crisis ought to cause every American to focus their attention on the relationship between our money system, banking, and the range of social and economic issues that plague our nation today. Rather than remaining divided over a range of political causes and agendas that are symptoms, I want to contend, of our underlying money system, legitimate symptoms, real symptoms. When you get sick, the symptoms are real, but they may not be the systemic cause of the problem. It is much more constructive for citizens, politicians, advocates, and activists to focus our collective efforts on understanding and correcting the root cause of our economic injustice and social disparities in America. Now I want to pause and say, because oftentimes when we talk about money reform, some bright, intelligent, gifted person will say, well, money reform does not solve all issues. That is true. Money reform may not solve all issues, but I do believe that it creates the conditions where many of the issues we're wrestling with are no longer necessary. I would contend that many of our discourses of difference are necessary ideologies in a money system based on scarcity. If there are not enough economic chairs for the number of people in the game, you need a discourse of difference, racism, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, anti-immigrant rhetoric. You need a discourse of difference to determine who's going to have a seat or a place at the table. But if we are able to imagine, and it really takes courage to imagine an economy based on sufficiency, not insufficiency, but sufficiency. If there are 10 people for 10 people in the game, if there are 10 chairs for 10 people in the game, hopefully over time they'll realize, maybe I don't need to push you aside. Maybe I don't need to shove you because you have a seat, we all have a place at the table. So yes, money reform may not, a public money system may not address all issues, but I believe it's a foundational issue that we must address. And at its core, our money system appears to be the foundational systemic reality that produces much of the poverty, inequality, and injustice in our society. So I am delighted to be here today and to work with folks across the country, to work with faith leaders, to work with the American Monetary Institute. I'll be working with faith leaders over the next year to launch on April 4th a campaign called the New Abolitionism, to really invite faith leaders to reclaim the theology of economics that has been at the foundation of the major religions of the world. It is principally just Islam that has maintained its historic critique of macro usury, and it's principally been Christianity in all of its various recensions, Protestantism, Catholicism, and Orthodox traditions, and Judaism, which have given up their historic critiques and positions on the way in which macro usury destabilizes our society.
Where will that be?
Oh, it's gonna launch at my church. I'm not here to give a commercial about it. I want to be respectful for why we're here, but it's gonna launch April 4th through the 6th of next year. The 4th is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. We are having a colloquy on October 31st and November the 1st, bringing together bankers and economists to address some foundational assumptions about money. We're bringing together faith leaders to have an interfaith symposium on usury. The afternoon of October 31st rather.
This
And then
year, next
This year. That's this year. This is an initial sort of pre-launch colloquy on money. What I have felt we.
October 31st to November.
Yes, ma'am. The website, I wish I had the website for, I think it's going to be the new abolitionism.org, but nonetheless, the whole point and purpose of this effort is to reclaim the theology of economics in the major religions of the world, working with Protestants, Catholics, Episcopalians, others around this whole issue. I'm going to pause. I have, more, but I think that's enough. I think that what I do want to say is I really believe that this is so critical now. As I said earlier, we do need a unifying meta-narrative that links the disparate groups on the left. As long as we continue to be divided by our issue of that we're passionate about, whether it's the environment, LGBTQ rights, mass incarceration, Black Lives Matter, police accountability, education, as long as we continue to be divided, we'll continue to be taken advantage of. And we need a narrative that links us together, that unifies us together. All Americans, regardless of your race, regardless of your background, if we're to have any hope, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, if we have any hope of pushing back against the 0.1% that's determined to keep all of us in interest and debt servitude. Thanks for listening to me today, and I yield to Joe Giovanni and